So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can make bamboo forests, rice paddies, and feature trees. You know the ones that I mean, the twisted cherry trees that allows your warriors to look off into the distance pensively and contemplate the chaotic forces that are destroying the harmony of the world. So I was lucky enough for Games Workshop to send me a Cathay army to paint and play battle reports with. Now, they gave me a deadline and of like the 10th of June to get this army, and the army didn't actually show up until the 2nd. So I had time to contemplate and sort of over egg how much I could achieve in that time. And part of that is that I wanted to make a board that would be appropriate for the Cathay army to play on. And I only had a week to do it, or 8 days, to paint both the army and make the terrain so that I could both film the battle reports and submit to Warhammer Community. So the stuff that I'm going to be showing you in this video is as simple as it could be to produce an effective looking board. Now, the reason I didn't film the full army paint was that actually it was a very quick method. I just slap chopped the army, did some dust spray with Tamiya, flat earth and flat flesh mixed, and based them in a happy scheme. It wasn't a drastic army paint that I thought I'd waste your time with. And if you've not seen it, out at the same time as this video, there is a battle report as well as the Cathay Army Guide. And if you like the video or any of these three, please do all the YouTubey stuff. It really does push me to do more of this day of release content, more interesting content maybe, like these terrain videos. And if you really like it, there is a Patreon link below where you can get yourself early release videos, access to the Discord. And if you're going to be buying a Cathay army or any other bits of hobby supplies, there is a link to the hobby workshop below that's an affiliate link that helps support the channel as you buy things that you were going to buy anyway. So with it, let's get down to business. So the first thing to do was select the basing material. Normally I use MDF. Most of the studio, or if not all of the terrain that you see on the channel, is based in MDF, but for this I wanted to start trying out new things. And I've been watching Mel the Terrain Tutor's channel for donkey's years, and he's always going on about EPVC, so I wanted to try it out. I've never been able to find it in the past. What the fuck is EPVC? When you Google it or ask anyone, they've no idea. Foamed PVC is apparently what it's called in the UK. As soon as I typed that in, it came up. So the benefits of using this material is that it can be cut with a craft knife. I'm not having to get the jigsaw out of the garage. It can be done at the desk and easily recorded. Now, it has more of a tendency to warp, I would say, than MDF. However, with what we're going to be making, it's not going to be a problem because the ratio of length to width in the objects that we're making will just be completely fine with what we're doing. Outside of one problem, which we will address as we're going through. And when I say problem, it wasn't. So let's carry on. I beveled the edges just with, again, that craft knife, trying to get about a 30-degree angle, because I'd been watching an Eric's Hobby Workshop video that was like, oh, it stands up on 30 degrees. So just went for a 30-degree angle, not trying to reinvent the wheel with any of this. I cut a bit of an oval shape that I was going to be placing the feature tree on. And I cut out 2 rectangles for rice paddies, and it left me with a little bit left over that I can use on a road or something later. The reason I've not give any specific sizes for this is it needs to be something that you decide what you need for your table at home. If you're making a 4x4 for a the old world game, it's a bit useless for me to recommend certain sizes for you. Now, obviously, there are standard sizes within rule books that you can base this off. However, I recommend not worrying about that unless you're playing in a tournament with this. Building it by eye to be naturalistic looking, I find to be the best. The only thing that you need to ensure is that for your feature tree, you've got extra width outside of the canopy spread of the tree to form the hill that you're going to be making. And I just eyeballed that to be about 1.5 inches wider than the canopy spread in any direction of my tree. Speaking of trees, this is one that I got from B&M Bargains. Basically, I was just wandering about picking up some Vimto, as you do, and this tree caught my eye. Perfect, a plastic bonsai tree. And essentially, with the pot being unsuitable for the art of water, I just ripped the bonsai tree. Weirdly, it's got a taproot in that's securing it to to the pot. But now I clipped off that taproot, but just having a small nub of it will allow you to attach it to your hill quite easily. But yeah, bonsai trees, brilliant for these feature trees and different twisted, knotted tree forms. Next up was one of the old classics, homemade sculptor mold. Now this is a load of shredded toilet paper that I had, just the cheapest toilet paper. I put it through a shredder and then used a hand blender to blend it because I neither liked either method that is like the standard way of chunking up toilet paper to do it. So yeah, shredded toilet paper and then some casting plaster. What you want to do is mix it dry, I found, and then add the water so that you've got as much contact between the two so that it'll seep between the pieces as easily as possible. As ever, you're going for a cottage cheese consistency to this. If you've watched any other videos of terrain on anyone else's video channel, I'm sure you've seen homemade sculptor mold before. If anyone's desperate for me to make a video on how to make it, drop us a comment and I'll make it. But I'm sure this has been done to death by now. So the first thing I built was the landform for the feature tree. Now, this is something, again, I tried to keep it at like a 30-degree angle so a model would balance on it, but I wouldn't be worried too much so long as there is a bit of a flat area for you to place models on as they're moving across if you're playing a skirmish game. So, sort of by feel, not measured anything out, I just slapped on some of the sculptor mold. I also found it useful for building up bases of models on the larger monsters in this Cathay release, weighing down the Sky Lantern base, as well as giving a bit more of an imposing base for my Longma to stand upon. For the bamboo forest, I just gave some natural undulation to either side of this sort of weird squash looking shape. And for the rice paddies, what I did was just put a ring around the outside about 8 to 10 mil wide to provide the raised area that encloses the water of the rice paddy as the rice is growing. So before putting dirt on these models, I actually stuck the feature tree onto its hill. Now this did get a bit annoying during the static grass stage, but the ability to put the dirt over the buttress roots of the tree, I really liked to just tie that into the piece of terrain, so I would still choose to do it at this point. So the next step is one of the easier ones. We just spray all of the terrain that's currently white with a brown spray. This is just giving underbase to any basic materials we put on there. So if there is a slight gap or if anything chips off, it doesn't read as bright white and so unnatural. So I spray everything brown. This is Trench Brown by Colourforge. And then we get onto the actual basing steps. For that, what I'm going to be using is PVA to stick down dirt, and that's dried dirt. I've taken it from the ground, dried it in my oven, and to be honest, there's nothing more dirt looking than dirt, honestly. Sometimes you can need to sieve the dirt into different pots so that you've got like very fine dirt and coarser dirt. But this particular one that I found down the bottom of the road was just quite easy for putting onto anything. So I just whack a load of PVA all over the base and then sprinkle dirt on top of it. And it's honestly as easy as that. It's the simple basics done well. Now I see a lot of people mixing grouts into the dirt, but to me, it's a grout is only useful for changing the colour of the dirt. If you are happy with the dirt colour, don't bother messing with it. Strain out any fines to make it finer. Don't bother with grout. And just do that. If you want some really fine dirt, like on the corners on roads where something's been really worn down over repeated usage, yes, maybe using some grout, but dirt looks really similar to dirt, I find. So the next step was to bring out some precedent images, and this is an example of the best one that I found for the look that I wanted to go for. And that was essentially, I wanted a mystical looking forest, almost like those images where they've got the vibrancy turned up, because I wanted to give it this opposing feel to the rest of the terrain that I've got, which is much darker greens. I felt the grittiness could come when I start making burned villages and stuff like that, rather than in the naturalistic colours. To do that, again, we start slapping on randomised areas of PVA onto the dirt. This is both going to seal the dirt. I'm so sick of saying dirt. I bet you're sick of hearing it. Onto the base, and then I'm going to be using Woodland Scenic's fine turf in light green to sprinkle over it. Now this will give me a good base colour. I was happy with how it turned out based on those precedent images, but if you wanted a different colour of moss, like a much darker green or something like that, you could just use a different colour, substitute it in and out. Real easy for this step. So I just throw on as much as possible, get it sticking into that PVA. So I tap it off, reapply to any areas that I think needs a bit more. If anything isn't fully stuck down, so long as it's on the area, the next step we're going to do is going to seal it in. We're going to give the same randomized treatment to the feature hill. And I do this on all the pieces of terrain that we're going to be using. So it's on the sides of all the rice paddies, on the external sides, I'm going to be putting PVA and fine turf there. After giving it time to dry, the next step was the sealant. This is going to be a mixture of water, PVA and isopropyl alcohol. I did it in this way with a brush because I'd run out of pipettes. If you have pipettes, I do recommend just dropping the PVA on top, or even using a spray bottle to spray over the terrain. But I'd run out of those things, and my spray bottle I didn't want to pull out. It was absolutely pissing down outside, so didn't want to do that. So we ended up with a brush. So if you are doing this with a brush, dab on and try not to drag across the model, because it will lift up bits of the fine turf. It is a bit more of a pain, but it allowed me to continue moving with this terrain in the time frame, and honestly didn't take that long. And I think one of the things actually with doing terrain, and one of the bits I enjoy about doing terrain, and hopefully you can enjoy it as well, is doing things imperfectly and still coming out with a really good result, or a result you're happy with. So even though, like, you see everyone using a spray bottle to do this or that, a brush still works. You find a way round problems and just sort of keep moving forwards, and terrain can very much come together just as you keep applying layers. And channel some Bob Ross landscape drawings. So next up was the static grass layer. So I very easily could have cut the bit where I fucked up, but I'm going to leave it in because I think it's important. It had been a few months since I'd last used my static grass applicator, so I was misjudging the distance that I could put the crocodile clip, which provides the static charge or something like that. It works by magic in my eyes. So I put the static grass applicator actually too far away from the model. And that meant my static grass was falling lying flat. So make sure you get good discipline of how close you put that static grass applicator to your piece of terrain to get the static grass statically charged. Now, how I stuck it down was with just good old simple PVA again. It's building up those layers. We're sealing the model again. And I'm going to apply this to the outside of the rice paddies again, and the feature hill. The bamboo forest, I'm not putting any static grass on, because as we saw from the precedent pictures, it's just sort of moss on the floor, and then the bamboo, the shadow cast actually kills a lot of the understory that is underneath bamboo forests. So I start off with some Eden grass by Colourforge. That gives me that nice vibrant colour that we're looking for the terrain in general. I then apply a second layer of static grass, which is Dark Urban Earth by Jarvis. That's a 6mm static grass, and it's sort of a beige, dark beigey colour that gives me that sort of highlight in the static grass, whilst to those longer lengths. That if you look actually out of the window at this point in time, like around mid-June and into early July, the tops of the grass is getting yellow because it's drying out. It's getting further from the root, and the sun's just beaming down on it, and it gives it that paler colour. And that's what's provided by the longer, paler static grass, as I said, 6mm Dark Urban Earth by Jarvis. And I was quite happy with how it came out in the end overall. The 3-layered effect of having that fine turf and then a mid-height grass followed by a long length grass gave me the tiers within the overall system of putting it together that made it feel very verdant and lush, which is what you would be expecting from a very wet environment that'll have, say, rice paddies in. One thing to note here is that I've done it on a piece of greaseproof paper. I really recommend doing that and then using the lid of a spray can that you've previously run out of. I save them all to prop up your piece of terrain off the greaseproof paper. What that allows you to do is just very easily collect any static grass that's oversprayed outside of your piece of terrain, and then you can put it back into the static grass applicator or your pot, reuse again really easily. And it's just the easiest way I've found, rather than having to use a vac or anything like that anywhere else. Now, what you can see me using a little hand vac for is giving a final sort of straighten up to any pieces of static grass that have fallen by the wayside. You can do this with your fingers. I do it both ways, but a £20 tiny vac that I now use it on my desk all the time, and I find it really useful for sort of controlling where static grass points towards to give it that final sort of fluff up, because even when you use a static grass applicator, it goes sort of in every direction away from that static charge. Next, I moved on to decorating the pieces of terrain with bits of mid-level planting. So to do that, I used 2 types of clump foliage, mid-green and light green, as well as some green flowers by Gamer's Grass. And I just used PVA to stick them onto the base. If you're worried about your clump foliage taking a load of hits during gaming, soak it within the PVA before putting it on the model, rather than only putting it on the bottom of the clump foliage, or even soak it in PVA, wait for it to dry, and then hot glue it onto the base. It would be the most secure. But for this, I just wanted a quick turnaround, so I just PVA'd the bottom of the clump foliage so that I could get it ready in time for the project that I was doing it for. The flowers by Gamer's Grass, I'm just again PVAing the bottom of them and applying them around those areas of long grass, hopefully connecting them to like a piece of fine turf or the actual dirt at the bottom, rather than on top of static grass. Now, this was done only an hour after I applied that static grass, so there was still some play within the static grass. It wasn't fully cured, so I could just move it about a bit if needed. And we're on to the sort of home straight now. So on to the bamboo forests, this is where we're going to start applying some incredibly cheap bamboo stalks off Amazon. I'll link the ones that I used below. It was like 150 pieces for 10 quid off the top of my head. So I bought 2 of them to make sure I had enough, and started attaching to them to the bases in various ways. So to start out, I was drilling holes in the bases, and it was just very annoying to keep an eye on those holes, sculpt a mold, obviously, and casting plaster versions of it, leave white marks and stuff like that, was just a nightmare. Now, in the end, the best way that I actually found to do this was to get the pieces of bamboo that contained wire inside them, it's all the larger pieces, and actually just press them into the base and just rely on that wire inside to just pierce through any layers that I'd made. And actually, it was the most successful way. There was a few pieces that pushed the wire through the top of the bamboo, and I just bent the bamboo over, clipped the wire off, and let it go, and it just hid that break. It was by far the easiest way, because you're going to be attaching a couple of hundred bamboo pieces to these pieces of terrain, because what we want is a really thick, dense forest, and to represent that wider scale forest on the tabletop. So I'm going to contain that to just certain areas of the terrain. I usually go for like a split piece with a clear center down the middle, but it allows us with these bamboo pieces to actually get a very dense section of I'm going to say trunks. Is bamboo grown in trunks like trees? But all the trunks are going to be very dense together and going to be pretty much line of sight blocking if you get them as dense as I was going on a lot of the pieces of these. And it turned out a very nice effect in the end. Now, these do end up with a sheen to them at the end because they are plastic, but that's something that we can solve later with a bit of matte varnish, and we'll get into that because I've not filmed doing the matte varnish, but after this had dried, I just sprayed it all with matte varnish, and that was job done for the bamboo forests. So we just had the rice paddies left to do. So this was the biggest nightmare of the entire build. I used Green Stuff World UV resin, which I've used many times before, particularly on like the Trench Crusade terrain was the last instance of me using it in near enough exactly the same way. So I got the UV resin, mixed it up with some wildwood and a Nasdrag yellow, I think it was, just like some yellow to give it a tinge of dirty water. So I eyeballed that into the UV resin, mixed it up, and poured it into the rice paddies to give us a sort of 3mm, maybe 4mm, not 4mm, 3mm layer of UV resin in there. And then I took it downstairs and put it into the 3D printer's UV curing station. And that has come out perfectly on all of my Trench Crusade terrain. However, what it did do was not cure at all. It cured very hard on the top layer, and I'm talking like a less than a mil, so much shallower than I've ever experienced before it not drying down to. My Trench Crusade terrain was maybe up to 8mm thick of UV resin, was darker than this, so was like had less opacity through it. This had more opacity. I don't know what went wrong, but pivoting quickly, because when I got this off the UV curer, Phil was coming round to record a battle report. in about an hour and a half. So I had to pivot quickly into saving this to get something out of it. And what I ended up doing was using gloss Mod Podge. Now, I basically sacrificed a brush to do this because it still had UV resin on there, but the Mod Podge basically gave a sealant layer to the UV resin after I'd sort of peeled it out of the bottom. I painted the bottom of the rice paddies again with that mixture of Nasdreg yellow and wildwood. So I sprayed it with, with some Pro Acryl mahogany and then applied the gloss Mod Podge. I smoothed it out with a piece of card, like a sacrificial piece of card, and then put some static grass pieces on top to represent the rice plants. And that, after it was dried, would give me a nice gloss finish to the rice paddies. It wasn't quite the effect that I wanted, but it finished off the project in the time frame that I needed. So that was the final piece to put into this terrain build. I'm actually really happy with how the terrain turned out. The bamboo forests looked really nice. They might, as a bit of a reflection, they could do maybe with a bit more sort of dead yellow looking sprayed into them with an airbrush. But there's always bits and rooms for improvement. There is never a single thing which I would say anywhere that is perfect. There is always minute improvements that you can keep working on. And just to put a bow on this project, I think it's come out really well and representative of the army in the battle report that is also now up on the channel. Now, I've been recording terrain videos actually over the past few months. So if you do enjoy terrain videos, I will be coming out with hedges, feature trees, putting that together to make bocage, and my Trench Crusade board with magnetic fixings on so that you can store it much more easily than a normal board. So if you like terrain videos, stick around for that. And if you like the old world videos, there's Cathay Guide and Battle Report out now. And I'll see you in one of them in a bit.